I do have some left-wing beliefs. I do think that the Elgin Marbles should be sent to Greece. Boris probably has greater form in getting millions of people onto an island than getting... They come back in 10 years and there's an island of blonde children, hundreds of them.
Welcome to Quite Right's Questions and Answers. We'll be discussing which of our beliefs is the most left-wing conviction that we hold. We'll also be considering, if we were caught on a desert island, who would like to rescue us. Would it be Colonel Boris Johnson? Would it be Mother Superior Theresa May? Or would it be swashbuckling Captain David Cameron? And both Maddie and I will be responding to a reader's request to recite our favourite poem and to explain why. Our first question comes from reader Graham Clemo. And Graham, he asks, what is your most left-wing belief? Maddie?
Ooh, okay. I do have some left-wing beliefs. This one I know is going to be extremely unpopular with all listeners and probably you. I do think that the Elgin Marbles should be sent to Greece. Because, okay, I hope that I have reasons for it that are not... I know. I despise myself sometimes, but I think the reason that I think they should be sent back is kind of not for, like, DEI sort of retribution reasons. You know, I don't think every gallery in the world that has something that came from another country is morally obligated to give it back. I do, however, think that the Elgin Marbles are a very special case and that symbols of national identity are extremely important to a country. I think this is something that we understand, that, you know, it's partly why Britain voted for Brexit, because sovereignty mattered. They are such an important symbol of national sovereignty in Greece that I think it would mean the world to them if there's a sound way of giving them back, for example, perhaps with certain conditions attached. Like, you have to bring back the Greek monarchy, for example, or you can have the marbles, but we send a minor member of our royal family to go and rule Greece, for example.
But in a way, I suppose what it is it's about restoration.
Yes.
It's a celebration of one of the founding principles of our civilization, that the Acropolis and everything about it, that home of democracy, the font of our civilization, should be restored, made whole and renewed, rather than the fragmentation, the sort of Tower of Babel-like destruction and scattering of that which keeps our civilization anchored, you know, should be addressed. I completely understand. I can understand that.
Yeah, and I don't think that Lord Elgin was a baddie as well. This is the line that is often given.
I disagree, however.
I thought you would.
Because, I think it feeds into a broader narrative about decolonization and the wickedness of the empire, and the idea that the success of this country was built on pillage and theft and exploitation. And also, I think that it undermines the idea that museums should be places where you can encounter different parts of our collective past in conversation with one another. And also, I was in Athens this summer, and having looked at how the Greeks themselves have chosen to display the marbles in the Parthenon Museum, I'm not convinced that it is either as striking or as powerful a setting as the British Museum is.
How are they planning to do it? What was wrong with it?
The Parthenon Museum, I felt, was just a bit underwhelming. And
it has a beautiful view, doesn't it?
Oh,
the
of course, the
yes.
Acropolis is wonderful.
I've never been myself.
And I again, Athens is a fantastic city, and it's nothing against the Greeks per se. It's just that there is something about the British Museum where you see different historic periods in conversation with one another. You can see how civilizations rose and fell and what their influence has been on one another, that I think is great. But ultimately, part of it is often I take my cue from who's on which side of the argument. And even though
your best friends,
two of my best friends are on the return side, George Osborne, chairman of the British Museum, Ed Vasey, Lord Vasey, former culture minister. Nevertheless, it's all of the, with your exception, Maddie, it's all of the progressives. Let's get on the right side of history.
Byron.
Well, he's another exception, Aberdonian, though, who tend to favour it. And as I say, it seems to be going with the flow that we
Yeah.
should deconstruct our past, to seek to expiate our colonial guilt. And the logical endpoint of that is that the only works of art that you can ever see are those which are located in their country of origin. I also think that the record so far of the repatriation of treasures to other countries is a mottled one, to put it mildly.
That's true, but this is not going to be like the Benin bronzes. They have got a beautiful museum ready to go, and probably in exchange for the marbles, there would probably be some fantastic artefacts that might find their way into our collections instead. I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I disagree very strongly with the way that this argument has generally been framed. There have been legal attempts, including with Geoffrey Robertson KC, to paint Lord Elgin as a kind of criminal and thief. In actual fact, we don't know the state of the marbles had they been left where they were. There had been a very checkered history. They'd been blown up by the Ottoman Empire. I don't think that sort of his memory should be insulted in quite that way. I do think that if there's a way to have this discussion, I appreciate how difficult it would be, but to keep it away from the general arguments about restitution, if it could be, for example, a sort of gesture of friendship between two countries, rather than, I think that the Greek government have framed it as they have a legal right, which has never really been stood up. We should go about it in a more, I don't know, like a magnanimous thing to do, rather than because we owe the marbles. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I actually suspect that there will be a lot of...
in a kind of romantic way, almost.
A lot of people who will sympathise with you in a Byronic fashion. But I'm afraid on this I'm adamantine in my opposition and in my belief that we should not apologise and we should not begin this concession, because the people who would delight in it most are the people who... want to make Britain feel guilty about its past.
Yes.
Considering what my own most left-wing belief is, I've got lots of left-wing beliefs. And on the one hand, as you say, there's sort of DEI, identity-style left-wingery. Then there's egalitarian left-wingery, which at its worst, of course, is a manifestation of class envy and chippiness and so on. I do have one or two egalitarian views, well, several. One... I think invariably the working class have been proven right. They were opposed to appeasement. They were in favour of Brexit. The second thing is I dislike private equity because I believe that they are modern-day robber barons and the unacceptable face of capitalism. But actually, I'm not sure that those are necessarily left-wing
Perhaps
beliefs.
Not anymore. They used to be.
But one thing which is definitely a left-wing belief and definitely a minority view is I think that there are too many people in prison. I would dramatically reduce the number of women in prison. I would release the people who are there under the indefinite sentencing regime that David Blunkett brought in, and which, to be fair to him, he now believes is wrong. But I also believe that if you're going to use prison in order to reform people, in order to educate them, and in order to give them meaningful work, you cannot do so with so many people in prison. I recognise that when you have the criminality that we've been discussing this week abroad, and when people feel unsafe, that it is a risky and minority view. But I do believe that prison incarceration is, in many cases, counterproductive. And I think that there are a number of people in prison who should either be in hospital, being treated for conditions which relate to mental illness. But it's certainly also the case that for those who are in prison, we should be setting them to work. And in order for that to happen, then we need to have fewer people actually in those institutions so that that work can make a difference.
I suppose the flip side of what you're calling for is perhaps people for what you might term lesser crimes to be released. But would you concede that there are also a very disproportionate amount of crime is caused by the same people repeatedly offending?
Oh yes.
I mean, for public safety, is there not a case for basically barring those people who cannot control themselves and are making life a misery for their fellow citizens?
Well,
on the flip side of what you're calling for,
there are two people whom I hugely admire. who take a completely opposite view to me, you, and Neil O'Brien, the Conservative MP who's now in the Shadow Cabinet in charge of policy development. Neil argues, as you have, that there are some persistent offenders, and never mind rehabilitation, it's just the case that we're all safer if those people are kept behind bars for everyone's safety. I do recognise that.
I don't think I do and disagree with you entirely. I mean, for a start, this is a subject that you will know a vast amount more than me on. But I think that if you're going to show lenience in some quarters, that also at the same time there needs to be a powerful deterrent for people who repeatedly break the rules. And the first time they've been shown mercy, they squander it. Does that make sense? I think it's actually compatible with what you're saying.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's also the case that people will understandably say, well, if you're going to have alternatives to prison, community sentences or some other means of acknowledging that a wrong has been done and that retribution is required and repayment is required, that you need to have meaningful consequences and sanctions for those people who don't comply with those punishments. I think that's fair as well. It's also the case, and I think this is neither left-wing nor right-wing, it's just a sort of realistic thing, that of our prison population, around 20,000 are foreign national offenders who shouldn't be in UK prisons. If we were to deal with that problem, then we'd be able better to deal with those people who are in prison. I also, and this may be not left-wing but just chauvinist in an old-fashioned way, I think that we've got about 5,000 women in prison, and I think that probably only 10% of that number of women should be in prison.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is probably more likely to find favour with right-wing listeners, but if you think about someone like Lucy Connolly,
Yeah.
What she wrote was horrific, but the idea that a prison sentence is appropriate for a mother for saying something is wrong. And most women, there are exceptions, but most women who are in prison are people who are themselves victims of abuse or neglect, and who've been coerced or pressurized into either acting as drug mules or being involved in other forms of criminality at the behest of violent men who have some sort of control over them.
It was interesting at the Reform Conference when Lucy Connolly was invited to speak, and one of the first things that she said was that she thought that far too many people were going to prison.
Yes.
And I almost sensed a bit of ripple of shock in the room, because this was not what... I don't think this is the line that was shared by most people there. And it was interesting that Lucy Connolly's experience had led her to the exact view that you're expressing now. And frankly, I don't think it is chauvinist, because actually many of us, I would say, that they wouldn't like to see anybody being banged up for distasteful, disagreeable remarks, whether male or female. I don't think that Ricky Jones, the former Labour councillor that used some menacing language and mind-slitting his throat at a protest march in front of hundreds of people, should have been banged up either. You know, there's more important fish to fry.
Yes, again, I'd be fascinated to know what subscribers and listeners think, whether they think that this is just a soft surrender on my part, or whether this can spark a prolonged debate on what should happen in our prisons.
But I think we can all agree that repeated, I don't know, machete attacks should be prioritised ahead of hurty words online. And we are leading the way in the developed world for arrests for things that people have said online.
Precisely.
So the second question is from Elaine Gibbons, and she says, you are deserted on a desert island. Who would you trust to save your life? David Cameron, Theresa May, or Boris Johnson?
David Cameron. If I was on a desert island and I was condemned to stay there for any length of time, Boris would undoubtedly be the most entertaining and diverting companion. If I was on a desert island and I needed to make sure that my daily routine did not slip into idleness and self-absorption, then the bracing presence of Theresa May as the, not disciplinarian, but the sort of mother superior figure would ensure that my days were purposeful. But if it came to organising a rescue, then it would be Captain Cameron. I've long maintained that one of the reasons why David seemed like a natural prime minister is that he is, not just because of his class background, but because of his bearing, he is a natural British Army officer.
Officer class.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to...
You'd like to be his Batman.
Precisely. When it comes to formulating a plan, executing it, sticking to it, whistling to keep your spirits up during difficult times, then I think it would be David Cameron.
So David Cameron would not be a Melchett figure. He wouldn't be Captain Darling and I will be right behind you, 30 miles to be exact.
No. I think that he would be closer in a way to a David Sterling figure.
Yeah.
So I think that there is something about David Cameron which would mean that the long-range desert group would find him with his cap at a rakish angle as the jeep went through the dunes, trying to find a way to cause havoc in the enemy's rear. And similarly, if it were the case that you were on a desert island and you wanted someone to formulate a long-term escape plan, then he would be the person. Boris would be, as I say, a hilarious companion to have. But I fear that Boris might not necessarily stick with the plan, whatever it was. And I don't think he could necessarily be relied on to come up with the smartest and most detailed option. I think the thing with Theresa is that while she's hardworking, dutiful, organised and focused, Theresa doesn't always display the imagination required when you're in a tight corner to escape.
I think you'd be less likely to escape the island with Theresa, but the camp would be in order.
Yes.
There'd probably be ready food sources and water supplies and so on. But as to getting away from the island, I think you might be stuck there for some time, perhaps.
I think the coconuts would be chopped up neatly and the palm trees rearranged in good order. I think that Theresa's a very good cook, that however limited the range of ingredients, her full repertoire of culinary arts would be deployed. I think the thing with Boris is that every moment would be filled with laughter, but you might die laughing before you were rescued.
Yeah. Also, I'd say that Boris probably has greater form in getting millions of people onto an island than getting... My question is, because I think I have an answer to this, but it kind of depends on... I kind of need to ask Elaine more about the scenario. But my question is Boris... If he saves your life, does he also save his own life? Because I think if that's the case, then the kind of monstrous levels of self-interest would actually be helpful. If Boris saves his own life, gets himself off the island, but takes you with him, there's actually quite a good prospect of that happening.
The other thing, of course, inevitably is that you might well get off the island with Boris.
You might get off with Boris on the island.
Yes. So if you were female... companion, then I think that would be an inevitability. But I think the other thing is that you might well...
they come back in 10 years and there's an island of blonde children, hundreds of them.
Precisely. But you could secure escape with Boris. But the one thing is that you would find afterwards that there would be a column, a book, a press conference and a speech in which Boris explained how this escape had been effected. And he would also, I think, probably... write a book, as he has of Churchill, in which he explains that Robinson Crusoe was in fact a proto-Boris. And
Michael Gove was Man Friday.
Well, inevitably. I do note, however, that in this question, that there is one former Prime Minister who isn't mentioned, which is, would you trust Liz Truss to get you off the island? And I think you could, but that's only because Liz Truss would have the island become the victim of a nuclear bomb, and like Bikini Atoll, the island would be pulverised as a result, and you would be off the island, but you would be in fragments.
Manner of speaking.
And also, there is no reference to would Keir Starmer get you off the island.
No, you'd go mad and kill yourself.
You would go mad and kill yourself, but also Keir Starmer would probably sell the island to Mauritius, have to pay billions of pounds for it, and find that everyone on the island considered it to be a horrendous mistake ever to have him on the island in the first place. And our third and final question from one of our subscribers is from Alexander Gregory. And Alexander asks, could each of you recite your favourite poem and explain what you think makes it so great?
Ooh.
So, Maddie, we were both English literature students. So obviously, Alexander doesn't specify that it needs to have been an English poem. I don't know if it's Rimbaud, Mallarmé, or Rilke that you read at night for elevation and consolation. But I suspect that it's probably, let me guess.
Ooh.
I think that you're going to choose a 17th century English poet. I think you're going to choose a John Donne or a George Herbert.
How did you know?
Just a hunch.
I'm going to choose John Donne. Although I will say that I think some of my favourite poems are so long that I wouldn't like to bore the listeners by reading them out in their entirety. So obviously, I'm sure you can too. We can both do every book of Paradise Lost from memory right now, but we'd be here for some time. I could do the full quartets, but it's not fair on the audience. So I think the one I want to choose is called The Good Morrow by John Donne. And I choose this one because I think I can actually do it from memory. I had to read it at my best friend's wedding recently, and it actually went horribly wrong because I'd committed it to memory. But while they were signing the wedding register, it turns out that they were signing something that had been laminated. The vicar who was conducting the ceremony, who's also my husband, was still plugged into his microphone. So while I was trying to read this poem aloud to all the guests, all I could hear was the microphone with them going, "Just sign here, just sign here." No, you try this pen. So it kind of ruined it, and I think I fluffed it. So let me see if I can do it right now. I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly? Or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so, but this all pleasure's fancies be. If any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. And now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. For love all love of other sights controls, and makes one little room and everywhere. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Let map to other, world on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I, love so alike, that none do slacken, none can die.
That's beautifully done.
Thank you.
And one of the things about John Donne is that the poetry is quite charged, romantically, even erotically.
Yes.
So,
and that's definitely one of those examples.
Yes.
Yes.
And again, most listeners will know that John Donne had a relatively randy stroke dissolute youth, and then went on to become a very respectable divine, Dean of St. Paul's, and so on. And it is a striking thing about John Donne's poetry, and also a sort of later poet of the 17th century, Andrew Marvell, is quite raunchy.
It is raunchy, but I think those two things are entirely of a piece with one another. Firstly, during the randy phase that you mentioned, it's true. There's quite a lot of, it's a bit saucy, and I felt like maybe it was a bit naughty for a sort of respectable podcast, perhaps. But I think that you see that same passion and physicality come across in these later sermons and the holy sonnets. You know, batter my heart, three-person God. There is this kind of stirring and emotion that you see all through his career. And then towards the end, when the flesh is failing and he gives his extraordinary sermon, Death's Duel, at the very end of his life, I think it might even have given it in his final days when he was Dean of St. Paul's. You see that the passion can survive even when the body is failing completely.
And I think it's that capacity that anyone reading John Donne can have to understand his lusty youth, and the way in which actually he celebrates not just romance but sex, which is compelling. But as you say,
it is within the context of marriage. I think he did write these poems to his much loved wife.
Yes, and it also means that when he's, as you say, thinking, talking, writing about religious matters, it's not from the point of view of a desiccated ascetic who you, as you listen to, think they don't know what it's like.
Yes.
to feel the pull.
The sins of the flesh.
Exactly.
Yes. He has lived it.
Yes. And the related thing is often when one's encouraged to think about how to make literature, including poetry, relevant, dread word, to new readers, the assumption is that it needs to have been written relatively recently and that the experience of the poet needs to be very closely analogous to that of the reader. Here you have someone from 400 years ago, but what they're writing about, the feelings that they have, are, without wanting to be sort of too, BBC One-ish about it, are exactly those of someone who is writing or hearing a Lily Allen song at the moment.
Yeah. But there are also these interesting anachronisms that are, you sort of do have to understand to get to grips with a John Donne poem. And to be honest, I like that about the literature of the past. I think it's actually throwing in the towel to say, oh, I can't be bothered, this doesn't make sense today.
Yes.
You want to get into the thought world that informed these poems or books or whatever it is. And I love the way that at the time that he was writing these poems, there's exploration is going on. The Columbus expedition obviously happened in maybe just over 100 years ago when he was writing this. And he himself went on various voyages. I think he went on an expedition to Cadiz. I could be wrong. But there's all this contemporary knowledge about compasses and which you heard, the hemispheres. And there's another poem, is it The Flea, that talks about twin compasses. But some of this stuff it turned out to be inaccurate with time. So that the assumptions that they make reflect the contemporary theories about the body, about the world. And they actually haven't stood the test of time, but part of the joy is going back and working out what they were thinking at the time, for me at least.
What their minds were. But yes, the whole idea of discovering a new world, a newfound land, the exploration, it was both exciting, but also it's partly about the exploration of another person's body and soul.
Yes.
And the hemispheres is both a metaphor about geographical exploration, but also, inevitably, it's about the beauty of a woman's body.
Yeah, there's an even raunchier one that I didn't choose because I really think it would have... I'm too English to read out these things on a respectable podcast, but it's called To His Mistress on Going to Bed.
Yes. And we know that John Donne's enjoying, as young people might say, a moment now, partly because of the influence of Catherine Rundell, or maybe it's Rundell, who's an Oxford Don who's written a biography of him, and she's also a nature writer as well. I don't know, have you read her book about?
No, I haven't. I should.
It's a critical biography, but it is designed for the general reader. It's been very popular over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, and it's led, I think, to a spike in interest in, or a renewed interest in, John Donne.
Yeah.
Now,
what have you picked?
Well, my choice, I'm afraid I'm going to read it out because my memory is my mind is full of sort of discarded bric-a-brac, and I don't have the beautiful recollection that you do. I should say in passing that I have a friend, an older colleague who still works for the Times, called Michael Binnion. Was the diplomatic editor there. He commits to memory a new poem every day.
Which is a wonderful practice.
Oh, completely. And so I live in awe. But this is The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled bine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The lion's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outleant, his crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard and dry, and every spirit up on earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted evensong of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around. that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope, whereof he knew, and I was unaware. So the poem's written at the turn of the century,
choice. Yeah.
at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. And Thomas Hardy, of course, best known for his novels, Far From the Madding Crowd, Tess the D'Urbervilles, Mayor of Casterbridge, Return of the Native, and so on. But I think that the sort of contemporary consensus will be that he's an even greater poet, perhaps, than he is a novelist.
Yes.
And the thing about that poem is you can feel, you can sense what it is to be out abroad at the very heart of winter, in the season between Christmas and New Year, and he's looking at the end of the 19th century at this landscape. And it is the dead heart of Christmas. And the land's sharp features, i.e., no foliage. He's described the sort of, the trees like broken lyres. The land's sharp features seem to be the century's corpse at the end. And so he has this sense of foreboding, which lots of late Victorian figures had at the end of the 19th century, that the future was one which would be bleak. And, of course, Hardy is the great lyricist of not despair, but certainly of melancholy. And then he describes the single voice of the thrush and the beauty of it and the hope that it embodies and the sense that there is, though he can't reach it or share it, in nature, the prospect of some form of renewal. So he is there aware that there will be a brighter future to come, a new year, a new century dawning, but he carries with him the memory of the deep sadness that an experienced, and one has to say older man will feel.
Yes, it's a great choice. It's one of the most decidedly wintry poems that I could think of. I guess another one, maybe The Eve of St. Agnes, is another beautiful wintry poem. And it sums up that feeling, but also I think the dose of optimism that you get at the end of that poem, the was it some blessed hope whereof he knew?
Yes.
And I was unaware. It's kind of, in a way, I think it's quite apposite for Hardy himself and his career, because at this moment, he's one of those writers that moved quite late in his career from writing novels to writing poems. A bit like Ian Forster didn't do poems, but he moved into criticism. But basically there comes a point where there's no more novels and then it's all poetry for Hardy. And that's when, as you say, he has this incredible artistic flourishing. But it's all to come for him. So in a way that optimism at the end of the poem feels quite apt, because he's yet to write the Emma poems. He's yet to write on Beanie Cliff. I think he hasn't yet written The Fallow Deer.
No, I don't believe so.
No, but there's all of this to come. So he's maybe I'm reading too much autobiography into this poem, but
no, I think that's right, and I think that it is. There's a plethora of Christmas verse, as one might call it, from Christina Rossetti to John Betjeman, which is either reflective or joyous in different ways. But the point about this poem is that, again, it speaks to me. I'm one of those people who, perhaps curiously for a Scot, doesn't like New Year's Eve, feels, and looking back, a sense of melancholy about opportunities not taken. But what the poem does is that it captures that broader sense of the backward look and the regret, but also enjoins on us a sense of hope. The other thing is that the dense imagery, the comparison of the trees and the branches to lyres and so on. Again, you have in someone who was writing just before him, but whose work I think actually wasn't published until later, Jerry Manley Hopkins, you have again that capacity to write about nature, not in the, I wouldn't say syrupy, but certainly in the romantic fashion of the beginning of the 19th century. It's nature reflecting an inner feeling, but reflecting it in a much more mature and hard, in every sense of the word, hard-bitten way.
There is a bit of similarity with Manley Hopkins in this poem. There's that one line, what is it? The blast bereft plume.
Yes,
that
exactly.
could have come straight from a Manley Hopkins, I would say.
Precisely.
The kind of the invention of maybe not entirely new words, but putting existing words together,
yes,
hyphenating them, turning them to a new compound word that is entirely original, unfamiliar,
new
and
compound
inventive
words, and then the alliteration with plosive consonants as well. And I hope that listeners, whether they're John Donne, Thomas Hardy, or poetry fans of any kind, will let us know which poems mean something to them. Because, again, it's for both Maddie and I believe, not a concern, but certainly an object of curiosity that when we talk about culture, we often talk about culture as it affects politics and public policy. But Spectator subscribers are people with interests that go well beyond the passing show of politics. So please do let us know which poems mean something to you, and we'll have an opportunity to reflect on those in the future.
And also, I think this has slightly encouraged me to try and learn more poems off by heart, because when you really know a poem by heart, it's committed to memory.
Yes.
I think the phrase by heart kind of sums it up. It's committed to memory forever. You have it there, and it will sometimes come to you in unexpected moments.
Yes.
Something will resonate and you'll feel actually that you're not alone in the world, for example. I mean, and other thing, just with the memory aspect, it's amazing how long it stays with you. You know, my father very sadly has got quite advanced Alzheimer's. He can't move, he can't really do anything for himself anymore. But the other day I was looking after him and he can still do these large chunks of poetry. He used to read me the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is one of his favourites, and he can still do. He did like 5-7 verses of it. All I had to do was say the first line: "Awake for morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight, and lo, the hunter of the east has caught the sultan's turret in a noose of light," which I think is a beautiful beginning. And he went off, and he could do 7 verses or something without my help. It's amazing how long it can stay with you.
It is literally a treasury forever. I remember in some of the debates about whether or not children should be learning poems, the argument was that learning them by heart was learning by rote, and that it was a grim task. But the person,
not very poetic of me, absolute bollocks.
But the person who made the case, funnily enough, for learning poems by heart most energetically outside politics was John Cooper Clarke. So, you know, someone again from a working class background who thought, why should poetry, why should high culture be seen as the inaccessible preserve of an elite when in fact it belongs to everyone?
Of course it does. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to submit your questions for Quite Right next week, you can do so at spectator.co.uk/Quite Right.